Can we ever trust science? Only if we get the money out of it. Dr. John Campbell, YouTube sensation, explains how that could happen. Hello there, you 5 million glorious miracles. Thanks for joining me on this channel. This is a video you're going to love. I spoke to Dr. John Campbell, who used to be a nurse and indeed trained nurses and has a PhD, and his channel where he talks about coronavirus pandemic and the various mutations, permutations, regulations, but primarily the medical connotations and analyzes medical data, has been a total sensation. I watch his videos myself. I know loads of you do. Let me know in the comments below if you do watch Dr. John's channel. He's a fantastic guy, a brilliant communicator, trustworthy, and in my opinion stays super objective. On the full Luminary podcast, Under the Skin, which is on Luminary, where I do my podcast, we talk in depth about what's been going on in the last couple of years. In the part of the conversation I'm willing to put on YouTube, we talk about double-blind science tests. Do you even know what that means, a double-blind science test? I bet you don't, do you? I bet you've been pretending to know. I bet you've been using that phrase. What is a double-blind science test? He talks about how things are clinically trialed. He talks about the power of placebos. It's a fantastic conversation. You're going to love it. Stay to the end and hit me up in the comments about what you think of this chat.
Objectivity is really quite difficult intrinsically in pharmacology, because whenever you put forward an idea in pharmacology, you'll always get someone who says, well, where are the randomized double-blind controlled trials on this? So if you're talking about hydroxychloroquine or you're talking about ivermectin, for example, as an early treatment, people will say, well, where's the large-scale randomized double-blind controlled trials on this? Well, there isn't any.
Can you just tell me what a randomized double-blind trial is, please?
Sure. So if you want to know if a new drug works, you have to have a clinical trial to see if it works. This is the experiment to see if it works. So you want a few thousand people who are actually getting a new drug and a few thousand people who are not getting the new drug. But the point is, if you've got a few thousand people and you say to them, well, I'm giving you this new sophisticated drug and we think it's probably going to make you better, they'll think, oh, I'm getting a new sophisticated drug. It's probably going to make me better. And the fact that they think that is going to make them better is likely to make them better in itself, that belief. And that's well recognized. That's called the placebo effect. But then if you say to another group of people, well, we're doing this clinical trial and those group of people over there, they're getting some nice sophisticated new treatment, whereas you're just getting a sugar pill, you're just getting a placebo, you're just a control, you're not as important. Now, not only will those people not have the placebo effect, they could actually believe that's making them worse and have what's called a nocebo effect. So we have to have two groups, and it's absolutely vital that who goes into those groups is randomized. So if you imagine, could you have all men in one group and all women in another group? Well, obviously not. Could you have young people in one group and older people in another group? Well, obviously not. Could you have people with heart disease and smokers in one group and non-heart disease and non-smokers in the other group? Again, you would be comparing apples and oranges. You have to compare like with like. So you can think about things like male, female, age, body mass index, smoking status, heart disease. And you could allocate people to one group or other, the experimental group getting the drug or the placebo group, based on that. But of course, then there's thousands of things that you don't know about. So the only way to compare like with like is to randomize it. So you must have randomization either to the experimental group or the control group. And then it has to be blind to get rid of this placebo and nocebo effect. And the only way you make it blind is you have the drug looks the same and the placebo looks the same. And that means the patients are blind. So the patients don't know whether they're getting the drug and they don't know whether they're getting the placebo. They don't know. And as well as that, it has to be double blind. And if it's double blind, that means the nurses and the doctors giving the treatment don't know whether they're giving the active treatment or where they're giving the placebo. Because if I go into a patient's cubicle who's sick and I give them a drug and I know that's the drug, they're going to be able to read that in me to some extent. And the people interpreting the results mustn't know whether it's actually the drug or not. That means it's all objective, or it promotes objectivity. So that means it's a randomized, that you have to be random allocation, mathematical random allocation as to who goes into what group. So it's randomized. It's got to be double blind, so the patients and the staff and the people interpreting the results don't know who's in which group. So it's a randomized double blind. It's controlled because the control group are not getting the active treatment, and it's a clinical trial. And that is the gold standard of working out what treatments are.
That's the first time I've ever understood that. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. You really broke that down. I'm like one of them nurses from your VHS days. I get it now.
It's much easier if I can draw on a whiteboard at the same time.
I got to tell you, I missed the cutaway of the fountain pen. That's killing me not having that.
Oh yeah, I've got it here.
The thing I wanted to say is, with regards to the double-blind component of this experimental process,
controlled trial, does
that not in itself indicate that the power of consciousness and innate healing propensities within our nature is so powerful that science has to sort of blanket it out?
Absolutely.
You could just tell people, get better. Get better.
Absolutely. The placebo effect can do things that are apparent miracles. And more ominously, Russell, the nocebo effect can as well. So if people believe, for example, in witch doctors, and the witch doctor says, I put a curse on you, and the person who's had the curse put on them actually believe that, then that belief will make them sick. It's called the nocebo effect. So when I was young and foolish, I took an interest in mushrooms. And,
you madman.
Yeah, absolute insanity. I must have been about 20 or something like that. So I went out and picked some mushrooms, and I learned to identify psilocybin mushrooms. And I thought, well, I'll just take a couple of those and see what happens. So I took a couple of these psilocybin mushrooms. Now, I'm not advocating this, never done it again, confessed and repented. All that's finished. I never took enough to have any real effect anyway. But then I thought, I wonder if I think some of those mushrooms I picked had white gills underneath them, which would make them poisonous. Now, they didn't. I'd picked the right ones because I was very careful about it. But then I came to believe that I'd eaten a poisonous mushroom. And that made me start feeling really, really ill. It wasn't a physiological effect. It was just my belief, and I had to take advice to point out that I wasn't ill. So a nocebo effect can make you ill. A placebo effect can make you better, and really quite dramatically. Now, clinical trials have been done on this, where you can actually separate out the active drug from the placebo effect. So when I give you a painkiller, if you come into my A&E department and I give you 10 milligrams of morphine, for example, for your pain, then about 70% of the beneficial effect you will experience is as a result of the pharmacology of the morphine. About 30% of that is because you believe I've given you an effective painkiller. So it's actually been identified as around about 30% in the field of analgesia. And there's a placebo effect in absolutely everything. That's why whether you're looking at surgery, whether you're looking at wound healing, whether you're looking at treating heart disease, whether you're looking at treating brain disease, kidney disease, you always have to have this randomized double-blind component, otherwise you can't get objective results.
It makes me feel that consciousness itself, faith and belief are formative, foundational, necessary components of reality in the way that reality is expressed and realized, and to foreclose that reality is hubristic and sort of lacks optimism and open-mindedness. That seems to me that that's telling us something fundamental.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Russell. Men and women are holistic. We are mind, clearly. We're a body. But there's also a spiritual component, whatever you take that to mean. So whenever you have science that's devolved of the individual, the role of the clinician really is to put that individual back in. So, when I go to a patient in pain, I'll hold the hand and I'll be with them. I'll come alongside them. But looking at it from a much broader point of view, science really, modern science, I feel, does inform spirituality in a way that's never been informed before. So maybe we'll just take a couple of examples. If we take one example as you as an individual or me as an individual, without being too crude about it, your father and my father were quite capable of producing 300 or 400 million individual reproductive cells per day. And yet there was the one cell that fertilized your mum's ovum became Russell. The one cell that fertilized my mum's ovum became me. So is that like one chance out of 300 million that you're you and not your brother or sister? It's quite interesting. And of course, that depends that you're on the particular ovum and that your mum met your dad. And of course, that goes back throughout the whole generations. So science can just show us this bewildering array of possibilities just in terms of the individual. And yet here we are, you and me, both experiencing consciousness. And more than that, to an extent, understanding, if not experiencing each other's consciousness, because we're communicating, and I can tell that you're understanding things that I'm saying. So it ties up in the individual. But then when we look at science, it also ties up into the whole nature of the universe, without being too grandiose about it. Because if you take any parameter in science, take any science, so you take biology, take geology. If you change any aspect of geology, pretty well any aspect of geology, you don't have a stable planet. So if the Earth's a little bit further from the sun, or closer to the sun, or the moon isn't the right mass and the moon isn't at the right distance, and the amount of uranium in the Earth's crust is not right to give the right amount of plate tectonics, and the amount of water in the oceans is not right to give the hydro cycle. If you change anything, you don't have a long-term stable planet, and therefore you don't have human beings. So we depend on everything in physics, everything in chemistry, everything in geology, everything in biology being exactly as it is, or you and me are not experiencing this, whatever this is, this consciousness now that we are currently experiencing. And the more we learn about science, the more improbable it looks that all these things could just arise spontaneously as random chance. So it's just a whole fascinating area where, people tend to talk about a religion, science, as if they're in separate boxes, or even worse, that they are opposed to each other. Whereas to me, the more you learn about science, the more it leaves for the sheer wonder of this phenomena we call consciousness.
There you go, you're learning something. If you're not already a subscriber to Dr. John's channel, have a little look in. We've got a great video coming up soon from Jimmy Dore, who's also been on Under the Skin, another great YouTube sensation. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this chat. Give it a like, give it a thumbs up, give it a little subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one and this one. Sign up to my mailing list.